Homelessness and a lack of affordable housing are perennial issues in communities throughout Alaska, and the pandemic has made an already difficult situation worse.
I'd just like to let the citizens know that we're not here to send their property value down. We're merely trying to survive.
What services are available for Alaskans to help keep them out of the cold? We're discussing solutions to homelessness tonight on Alaska Insight. Hello, and thank you for joining us for the start of Season 5 for Alaska Insight. I'm Lori Townsend, and I'm glad to have you with us. In the coming months, we'll bring you analysis on a wide range of issues facing Alaskans, and as you heard in the open of the program, we start off this season with a discussion on a growing problem in our state, homelessness. Anchorage policymakers are debating options for building more shelter space in the city, but there are still people who prefer camping in the outdoor air. Alaska Public Media's Lex Trinan and Jeff Chen visited a large camp to understand what's keeping the residents out of the shelter.
At this camp in Anchorage's Mountain View neighborhood, being homeless doesn't stop people from living their lives. Some, like Caesar Carberry, are even running a business.
So the name of the business is A1 Neverboard. You're never bored if you're on a skateboard. Takes about a day, to tell you the truth.
Carberry sands down the boards, paints new designs, and adds trucks and wheels.
Skateboards are the complete is like $40, and I've sold a lot, even to the employees at Holiday.
It's enough to buy food and pay his cell phone bills some of the time. And it's also the reason why he's not staying in a shelter, where personal space is limited to a plastic tote. But there are advantages to staying in a shelter.
Staff is fabulous, security's good, they feed us, they house us, they clothe us. Everything we need, our needs are met. It's been good. Best experience of my life, actually.
The Sullivan Arena Shelter is the city's largest, sleeping close to its capacity of 400 guests each night. There's laundry, warm meals and hot showers, and service providers to help get clients on their feet.
65% of people are out of shelter within 30 days, and that's a pretty astounding number.
Shelter operators and Anchorage's politicians say it's the first step out of homelessness. Lisa Souter directs Beans Cafe, which operates the Sullivan Shelter.
I personally don't want to see anybody in a camp. I know more bad things that have happened to people in camps than have ever happened in any shelter.
But there are rules, curfews, and a lot of people in one place. Camper El Shaniqua Durfee says being in a shelter can feel demeaning.
If I'm an adult, I don't think I should have an 11 o'clock curfew to be inside of a building because this person is drunk or this person has mental health issues. I'm supposed to just kind of be quiet and let them react or behave however they'd like to. So I'm not really good with getting along with people.
After 10 years of living in tents, Durfee says she prefers camping to indoor life, even if it sometimes means threats of violence. The solitude of her tent and the beauty of the outdoors calms her mind.
When the fall hits, all these trees change all different colors and it's just quiet enough to where at night, that highway sounds like an ocean.
An added challenge to campers is the city's abatement program. Every few weeks or months, city workers post signs telling campers to pack up and leave. It costs the city hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, but they say it's for the health of campers. To campers, though, it feels like eviction.
Every single time that we get abated, there's more and more people that have to, because of a lack of place to put it or because of the lack of assistance or the moving back and forth, they lose more and more.
Some campers like Alan Levant Jefferson see a third option, a city-sanctioned campsite. As part of a loose group of advocates who have experienced homelessness, they propose converting an East Anchorage park, adding security and cleanliness requirements.
As a solution-oriented community, we would do all the cleaning, bag up all the trash, take it and put it in a designated area where we could meet and greet other people who are having the same problem.
The idea is not popular among Anchorage policymakers who say shelters are the best way to keep people safe and to reduce neighborhood blight. But both campers and politicians agree that the ultimate solution is just more real housing.
I just like to let the citizens know that we're not here to send their property value down. We're merely trying to survive.
These campers say they're ready to put in the work as long as the politicians put in theirs. Reporting in Anchorage, I'm Lex Trinan.
Following our initial radio story on this issue, Studio 223, a gallery in Anchorage, contacted us to get connected to Caesar, the man making custom skateboards. Caesar appeared at their first Friday art show last week and sold his entire collection. Joining me for a discussion on the ongoing housing issues here in Anchorage and the rest of the state are Jasmine Boyle, Executive Director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, and Helen Renfrey, Research and Policy Analyst for the Anchorage Coalition and the statewide Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you for having us this afternoon.
It's good to have you both with us. Jasmine, it's September, temperatures are dropping, COVID case numbers are at record high levels in Anchorage. What are you hearing now about the city's plans to help keep people off the street this winter? Do you think the Sullivan will continue to be used?
Facilitation process had a deadline. I believe that the first milestone was intended to be released on the 1st of September, which was intended to be based on the resolution that was passed and the start of the facilitation process, intended to be the facilitation's results for the intended plan for winter shelter this winter. That, of course, has not been released yet. So I do know that the work sessions continue. I am told that the facilitation process continues to move forward and that all parties agree that it's moving forward to something fruitful. I don't have inside knowledge on the locations or the specificity, but I will say it's winter effectively in Anchorage for people that are living in the shelter system or living outside. And it begins to be apparent to those of us that do the work, particularly our providers that do the work on the front line, that we have a week or two to make a decision about the Sullivan, both out of respect for the community at large, but also out of respect for the people living in the Sullivan who watch the news and are aware that they are living in a period of uncertainty, which on top of economic crisis and lack of housing is not justifiable in these times. We need a decision. We need a decision quickly. And if that decision is to continue on in the Sullivan for one more season, that's better than not having a decision out there for the myriad of different folks working on this issue.
From your perspective, what do you think would be the best fix? Just the Sullivan, or the Sullivan and perhaps some smaller shelters dispersed throughout the city? What would look the best from what you've seen in your research?
Well, in an ideal time, without the time crunch, without the financial resource limitations, I would say the best plan would be to create a strategy to have a number of small focused shelters distributed around Anchorage, and not solely for the intent of distributing things community-wide, very specifically to match smaller subpopulations of people and their needs to a community that is ideal. Our elders and our medically fragile need to be closer to hospitals. Our families and individuals that are in apartment units need to be closer to grocery stores, things like that. But we're not living in ideal times, and we do have a time crunch and a resource shortage. And so I would say keeping the Sullivan alone is not a viable option because we already have too many individuals in need. We're beyond Sullivan's capacity. We have almost 400 people in non-congregate locations, generally hotels across the community. So we need to think about Sullivan. We need to think about the end of the eviction moratorium, the end and reduction of federal unemployment benefits and other benefits, and the reality that homelessness is going to continue to get worse this winter. So we need the Sullivan, but we also need a contingency plan for what we do when those hotels need to be stood down, and what we're going to do if we see what we saw last year, which was hundreds of people who had never experienced homelessness before, suddenly in need of a shelter and additional housing.
At the beginning of the program, we saw a story about people who prefer to camp outdoors. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that should be accommodated?
I believe that we have to change the narrative about shelter versus camps because we have a common misunderstanding that if we build shelter, we will see a reduction in camps. The reality is there are many individuals that will choose camping over shelter any night of the year, sometimes due to safety issues, medical needs, sometimes preference, which you certainly heard about from the individuals that were interviewed. I think it's very telling that we did street outreach comprehensively for the first time in 2020. And we saw over 1,500 unique individuals outside. A third of them were brand new to homelessness. So these are not individuals with significant mental health or substance misuse needs, but these are individuals who said living in the mass care shelter is not the safest step forward for me. I'm going to choose a camp. And so we need to be pragmatic that shelter is not a solution for homelessness. Shelter is a critical part of the safety net. We need to have housing, and housing is what gets folks out of camps. Many of the individuals that you interviewed shared that what I'm looking for is a home. What I'm looking for is a step forward. And so we need to have the shelter solution for the short term, but it needs to be followed immediately by housing access for all of these individuals, or we will continue to see camps.
All right, thank you, Jasmine, for getting us started there. And I want to come back to that issue of housing in a bit. But Helen, I want to turn to you now. Additional unemployment benefits are now done. And as Jasmine noted, the eviction moratorium has ended. What can you tell us about the rate of evictions over this past year? And what do you think could possibly happen now that the additional safety, financial safeguards have ended?
So eviction filings have continued to happen, and evictions have continued to happen throughout the state while there was a moratorium in place. Fewer evictions were filed than had been filed in previous years. And one of the things is I can talk to you about eviction filings, but we don't really have the data on actual evictions yet because some of those cases are dismissed. The vast majority are found for the plaintiff even throughout the moratorium, even during the pandemic. The majority of evictions happen in our urban areas. Over 90% of the statewide evictions happen in urban areas, which is understandable. And about 60% of total statewide evictions happen in Anchorage itself. So over the last 11 weeks, there have been 279 eviction filings. 174 or 62% of those were here in Anchorage. As far as what will happen, we know that people will lose their housing. Even there are some, because eviction filings have decreased over the last year as compared to previous years, we know that the moratorium was working in keeping people stably housed. And those who are no longer under those protections, we anticipate that eviction filings will begin to increase.
How was it that evictions were still taking place during the moratorium?
Yeah, interesting, huh? So basically, in order for a tenant to be protected by the CDC moratorium, they had to file a document, a declaration that says that they're protected under the moratorium. But in order to file the document, they needed to know about the document. The vast majority of tenants are unrepresented legally in our court system. They had no idea that the declaration was available. Many of them didn't even know about the moratorium itself. And so if they had not filed that document, the landlord needed to file a document called an affidavit saying that they hadn't received a declaration from their tenants. And at that point, the eviction hearing and the eviction process itself could be continued.
Helen, Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, AHFC, is now offering rent assistance, again, for up to 3 months. That program is taking applications starting September 13th through October 3rd. Is 3 months relief based on evidence that this may be enough to help people get kind of back on their feet, or is it simply math, there's this much money and this is how much help that we can provide?
So this is the second application window, and AHFC's Emergency Rental Assistance Program is helping thousands of households and tens of thousands of individuals in the state already. This particular opening window from the 13th of September through the 1st of October will initially provide 3 months worth of rent, which is often going to be enough to keep people in their homes. And then there will be an option to, from what I understand, there will be an option to recertify at the end of those 3 months and potentially continue assistance after that time frame. So I've done some deep dive into eviction court records, and there was one where an eviction took place because the tenant was $150 short on their $600 rent payment. So for people like that, yes, definitely. There are some people who will be able to be stabilized within those 3 months. It really depends on their situation and what type of financial impact the pandemic has had. And I mean, there are different realities for all the different stories, for all of the different filings.
AHFC is offering this one program. Are there other programs in other states perhaps that you've researched that help stave off evictions that could possibly work here?
Yes, there are other states who are in the same place that we are, right? As a matter of fact, Alaska is doing a fantastic job of getting emergency rental assistance money into the hands of those people who need it. But there's other states who are starting to evaluate or implement eviction diversion programs, ones that link emergency rental assistance with potentially some other services in order to help these families and these individuals stay stably housed. There are emergency rental assistance programs in all states and all territories. We have some regional authorities in Alaska who are also carrying out their own emergency rental assistance programs. And there are those of us who are meeting and working hard to try and balance some of that power differential and evaluate our opportunities as a state for an eviction diversion program.
All right, thank you, Helen, for that. I want to return to Jasmine now. We were talking about housing earlier, and all communities in Alaska have housing challenges, lack of available space, expense, overcrowding. Jasmine, where do you see the biggest problems across the state, and especially in light of the fact that we know that rent prices have risen by a couple of percentage points, which may not seem like a lot to some people, but it could be enough to just put people over the edge. We just heard Helen talk about someone who is short $150 on their rent, so a 2% increase could make the difference for some folks. And we have supply chain problems, so it's not like we're going to be doing a lot of building in the short term, both because of the expense and the difficulty in sourcing some materials. Where do you see the biggest problems? Is it concentrated here in South Central, or are there other places in the state that are having even larger problems when it comes to housing?
It's absolutely a statewide challenge. Alaska has always rated in the lower quadrants when we look at it nationally in terms of access to affordable housing. But it absolutely starts in our smaller communities. I think that there's not only the supply chain issues that you spoke about, but there's the other dimensions of housing, the cost of power and heat, access to food year round, grocery stores and prices, and certainly economic development in many of our smaller communities, because in order to be able to afford those things, you need access to stable employment for you and your family members. And then what we absolutely see is when those critical pieces of the puzzle are not easily sourced in one's home community, many people will migrate to more urban areas. This happens across the country. I think that we just see a different scale and urgency of it in Alaska because our state has some unique structural and geographic components. What we generally see is people come into hub communities. But if you're a person that has more sophisticated medical needs on top of those housing challenges, if you're a person who's family members are involved with children's services, or you're involved with corrections, or have some mental health needs, you're likely going to end up in Anchorage. I am really fortunate that we've got quite a bit of interest with our housing community here in Anchorage to move forward on looking at creative ways to increase affordable housing in our state, particularly in Anchorage. What I hear first and foremost from our developers and our housing partners is that it doesn't pencil. It's incredibly expensive to build. There is a limited amount of space in Anchorage left to build. And so what we see then is, without a suitable market for more housing or affordable housing development, we see a reduced portfolio of available units. And I think COVID's a great example of this. Despite the eviction moratorium, or maybe because of it, we are now down to what is close to a 2% vacancy rate in Anchorage. The Valley is also down to a very low vacancy rate. And so we think about the fact that the majority of our state population lives in Anchorage or the Valley. We also have the most rapidly aging state in the nation, and that is concentrated in Anchorage and the Valley. And so what we hear from the experts is there isn't enough apartment stock. There is absolutely not enough apartment stock that's affordable to people on a fixed income. And there is a massive wait list on ADA compliant units for the elder members of our community, for people with disabilities. So these things all converge. And what we are facing with is many of the people that we're now seeing in Sullivan or in our camps are people who literally have a job, just not enough of a job to meet a rent to income ratio, and or they just can't find a landlord that will rent to them. You know, if you think about it from a landlord perspective, if you have a 2% vacancy rate, you can be very thoughtful and selective about who you want to rent to. And that makes people experiencing homelessness, people at the lower end of the income brackets, people who maybe have had financial challenges in their history, makes them less ideal rental candidates. So there's quite a bit that kind of converges when we begin to talk about housing, but this is a long-term problem in Alaska, and one that we have to move forward with on solutions that are statewide.
Continuing on that track, you were talking about the rapid aging demographic in our state, and the phrase silver tsunami has been used to describe the increase in elders who are falling into homelessness. Tell us about this increase and what's known about the why of this. You were talking about the tight housing market. I'm sure that's a huge piece of it. What else is contributing to this very troubling trend in older people falling into homelessness?
Well, Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, I believe, coined the term silver tsunami, and it started quite some time ago. So again, our state has been the most rapidly aging state in the nation since 2007. Again, this is a long-term problem. This is not new. It's great and wonderful that we're keeping elders in our statewide community. We want people to age in place. That brings a richness and a diversity, and certainly family and cultural elements to our communities. No one wants to see our elderly have to leave the state. We are certainly all aware that young people, particularly young people in search of jobs or different educational opportunities, are leaving the state. I think we've all heard our economic partners talk about our negative population growth. So what we see is elders are staying in place, but young people are leaving. And unfortunately, sometimes those young people are choosing to develop their families in other communities. And again, if you need medical resources, if you need other resources that people on fixed benefits sometimes need, whether they're formerly disabled or elders, you're likely to end up in the Valley, Juneau, Fairbanks, Anchorage, because those resources are available. And so that makes it very, very tight as a market. And when our property developers literally cannot make it financially feasible to develop more, that's where we run into the problem. Now, senior housing in particular has been an area of focus for not only AHFC, but also Cook Inlet Housing Authority and multiple other partners. So we frequently hear about new senior housing developments. The problem is the scale up on that is, again, for fixed income individuals, not nearly fast enough for our population that's aging in place.
So this isn't enough time for this, but we're just about out of time. So in about 30 seconds, what do you want people to do? I know it can be overwhelming for the public to think about how to solve this. What are one or two things that you'd want people to do right now?
I think first and foremost, recognizing that homelessness is always started and ended by housing. We need to have more housing, and that is something that is mutually beneficial. It is not only beneficial for the folks that are living in our shelters or our unsanctioned camps, it's also beneficial to everyone else in the community that wants that starter home or who has children that would like their first apartment. We all benefit. I think the other piece to it is just get engaged, share your perspectives as a volunteer with your elected officials, with your business partners. This is a community problem that we can all benefit from and rev up our economy by coming up with solutions for.
All right. Thank you so much, Jasmine Boyle and Helen Renfrew, for being with me this evening. Helping those who are vulnerable to losing their housing is important for all of us to ensure our community has good policies to help people in need and protect public health and safety. Being without resources isn't a crime, but it can be a crisis if there is no safety net to catch neighbors, friends, and relatives when they most need it. Support for proven programs that help people avoid falling into homelessness or get back on their feet quickly if they do benefits us all. That's it for this edition of Alaska Insight. Be sure to tune in daily to your local public radio station for Alaska Morning News and Alaska News Nightly every weeknight. Be part of important conversations happening on Talk of Alaska every Tuesday morning, and visit our website, alaskapublic.org, for breaking news and reports from across the state. We'll be back next Friday. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Lori Townsend. Good night.